Hello, friends. This is Dr. Benjamin Smith. Welcome to Take Every Thought Captive, our digital space where we explore the 2,000-year-old Catholic intellectual tradition. Today, I'm joined by my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Richard Bulzachelli, who's a professor of theology, my good friend Whit Smith, I like to call the General Catholic Provocateur. He's here for us today. Um, and what we want to talk about today is just kind of what's happened in the last year. I know we've been on a bit of a hiatus here for the holidays, but it's good to be back. Good to be back with good friends, uh, people like us to talk about important things that have happened in the last year and important things that are going to come in the year to come. Um, Dr. Wells Kelly, you want to get us going here?
Sure. Well, it's hard to ignore the
Yeah,
presidential election in the U.S. as maybe one of the most noticeable features of the year.
sure.
And while we're used to having an election every 4 years in the United States, so it's no real
Yeah,
surprise. There's no question that this past election was probably one of the most eventful that we've seen in a very, very long time. Certainly, like
sure.
in my memory, I would say, for as long as I've been alive, this is by far the most eventful election that we've seen. Even more than like the first two times that Donald Trump was involved in the electoral scene. But
That's a remarkable thing to say, right?
it
Especially
seems as
given
if
all
it's
the
been,
drama of 16 and 20.
yeah, it's just been a firestorm. But this year was different. We had a couple of assassination attempts on the president, and he ran against two different Democrats.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had that surprise turn in which Biden dropped out of the race after we were all sure he was cognitively, on top of his game, or sharper than ever, right? And then it was like, well, did everybody see that? And he was in bad shape. I feel bad for the guy, but
Mm,
it was obvious to everyone watching he couldn't handle it,
yeah.
and so they pulled him out. And then it was all of a sudden without a primary. And this is really the interesting thing that everybody just ignored. Well, everybody in the media just ignored that essentially, Kamala was appointed to be the candidate without any primary, while
Sure.
the mantra was, defend democracy. So it was just a bizarre it was just a bizarre election.
Yeah.
And I think once again, we saw some interesting trends in terms of demographics in this election,
Yeah.
which I think from a Catholic point of view is sort of interesting. Um, we, I mean, people have been saying for a long time that politics is demographics.
Hmm.
And I don't know how much I agree with that, but it certainly has been sort of a narrative that's made itself true for
Hmm.
decades now. And you could see some real shifts happening.
Hmm.
And the shifts are happening in areas, some of which are heavily Catholic. Um, so if you see the Hispanic population, right? A
Right.
massive field of people, right? So it's ridiculous
Sure.
even to lump them all into one group, but that's what the demographers try to do. So if you look at the Hispanic population, massive shifts away from a sort of um, Democrat stronghold, right? And really, it's about, what is it now, about 50-50 Republican Democrat on
Hmm.
in the Hispanic side.
Right.
So that's a huge shift in terms of politics in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, there have been some movement among African Americans, particularly among African American men, but African Americans they don't constitute a major part of the Catholic world
Hmm.
in the United States, and
Or really just generally the electorate.
or the electorate generally,
Yeah.
right? I don't know, like I don't know at what point all the numbers will be crunched on this, but I'm not aware of it having been done yet. I'm kind of curious to see if there was greater participation among African Americans in the electorate this year than in previous years, because in on the street surveys, you did see significant proportions of African American men coming out in support of Donald Trump, but African American men have tended not to participate in elections very much.
Hmm.
So I don't know if there's a bigger shift here than than our initial measurements would suggest.
Sure.
As far as Catholics go, um, I don't know, you might know these numbers better than I do. I kind of remember that in the 2020, Trump won the Catholic vote. I'm not
Hmm.
sure where he came down on the Catholic vote this time around.
Yeah. I think it was about even from what I've read. Leaning Trump, especially among white Catholics, but kind of leaning Trump, but
Hmm.
not like overwhelmingly.
So then after the election, right, we're in the transition period, and it's been a whirlwind, right? I mean,
Sure.
it's really remarkable. People are kind of treating Trump as if he already is the president.
I
And
think it's
actually, it
especially the
reminds
case
me,
with Biden being so, um, just kind of checked out.
yeah, it's been as if there hasn't been a president in the United States for a very long time.
Right, right.
But what's interesting is that there's a parallel here between Trump and Obama, uh, when Obama was first elected president. I don't know if you remember this, but
Mm.
I remember it very clearly, that when Obama was elected, right, um, the first time, he immediately came out with a seal of the president-elect of the United States, and he would.
I do remember
Do
that
you
now.
remember that?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
he would sort of like post things online, and he would issue statements, with the seal of the president-elect, as if it was like an actual office.
yeah.
Trump is behaving in largely the same way, right, at this
Mm.
point.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Yeah, except he earned the seal because people are kissing the ring at Mar-a-Lago.
That's
Right.
true. Yeah, yeah. That has been funny to see people going down to Mar-a-Lago. Although it's especially funny to see the CNN host, who had been, basically labeling him as a fascist dictator who's, going to destroy democracy and do all these terrible, evil things.
I'm
And they're
pretty
like,
sure
well,
they
he won, so I guess we'll go down there.
I'm pretty sure they use the phrase literally Hitler. Am
Yeah,
I wrong?
right.
Yeah,
The funny thing about the funny and tragic and terrible thing about calling Trump Hitler is that it's definitely the case he's not responsible for the death of 6 million Jews, right?
right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Right. And it's like, oh, that part of being Hitler isn't really significant. Because yeah, he hasn't done that, but he's literally Hitler. I'm like, wait a second now. Like, I think the big problem with Hitler, right, is the Holocaust, right? You know what I mean?
That was a
Obviously
big part of
bombs,
it.
but point being, right, like, come on now. That's a significant difference, right?
I'm not sure Hitler would have been Hitler if he hadn't done the Holocaust.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Well, Rich, what do you think is like, say, from the perspective of Catholic faith, Catholic sort of principles, what do you think is kind of the significance of this election, or the sort of, is there kind of a Catholic interpretation, right, of President Trump's real election?
I guess it depends how you define Catholic,
Hmm.
how I would answer that. Um, because I think I could offer a Catholic interpretation, and there are others in juridical communion with the Catholic Church who would offer a very different Catholic interpretation of events.
Sure. Well, let's hear yours.
Yeah, so I would say that this election we saw, well, we've been talking for a long time, right? Since Trump first appeared on the scene, you and I have been talking about political realignments that were likely to
Mhm.
occur under Trump, and it turns out we were 100% right about that.
Right.
And it's been very interesting to watch over the past 10 years, um, how those alignments have actually broken down.
Hmm.
So this election, I think even more than the previous one, we saw the alignments come down largely to along the lines of a culture war.
Hmm.
And I think that was beginning toward the end of the previous election. Remember when the Republican National Convention ended with, the Ave Maria? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Which, I mean, I don't know that, I have to say it was a high-spirited moment as a Catholic, watching the
Absolutely.
Republican National Convention. We didn't have that this time around, but nonetheless, when the Democrats at their convention had literally a portable abortion clinic, I think that
Yeah.
I think that kind of sealed the deal on, the culture war aspect of this election.
Yeah, I mean, what a party, right? I mean, your number one issue. Maybe one thing if you're like, I remember maybe a decade ago, a lot of times, pro-choice people would say, well, abortion's always regrettable. It's bad that it comes to this, but sometimes it's only a choice that a woman has. We want to try to make abortion rare and but legal and safe, that kind of thing,
Uh-huh.
right?
Mhm.
That was the rhetoric, right? That lots of times brought forward. Like all that's gone, man. I mean, they kind of just love abortion.
Oh yeah, you remember the campaign? This was years ago now.
Mm,
The campaign "Shout Your Abortion." Do you remember that?
I
Of
do,
He had
course.
these he had these celebrities coming out and just sort of like talking gleefully about how their abortion and how great it was and everything.
right?
At times they shouted.
Right, literally, that's
They were
right.
shouting.
So, I mean, I think it's obvious, right? You took a turn. The mask is off. There's no question that this election seemed to be came down to, I don't want to say good and evil exactly, but what I want to say is like evil
Mm.
or something other than that, right?
Sure.
So the the I think there are a lot of people who voted for Trump this time around. Remember, there were a lot of latecomers. I don't know if you like you probably saw the same thing I did in this
Mhm.
election. You saw a lot of latecomers who abandoned the Democrats. They had been sort of like Democrat, Democrat, Democrat
Mhm.
right up to nearly the time of the convention.
Right, right.
And then they started moving over in droves, declaring that they were going to vote for Donald Trump. And these are
Mhm.
fairly high profile people, many of them.
Mhm.
Who knows about all those, ordinary people, right? Those
Sure.
just Joe Democrat
Yeah. Well,
who, who, back in September thought he was going to be voting for Kamala Harris
mhm.
and then woke up, in November and said, no, I'm
No,
voting
yeah.
for Trump.
One interesting thing I've read about a good bit is the kind of pipeline from Bernie Bros to Trump, right? That is that there has been, like some people, a number of people who voted for Bernie who then went over and decided to vote for Trump,
Hmm.
which is kind of
Yeah.
an interesting phenomenon. I don't know. What do you think about that, Whit?
I was at a New Year's party, New Year's Eve. Happy New Year and Merry Christmas still to our audience, by the way.
Absolutely.
Um, and I was talking with a professor from a university
Hmm.
whose field is normally left wing.
Okay.
And he himself would be classified as left wing
Hmm.
leaning. And we were talking, and he is a Trump guy now.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Interesting.
And it's horseshoe. It's the horseshoe theory, right?
Yeah.
So the Rage Against the Machine, that band has now become Pfizer Punk. They're Pfizer Punk, and so the like '90s and early aughts kind of George W. Bush is the devil, and we've got to get rid of Citizens United, and sweatshops are a big deal, and all that. That's either been subsumed into TikTok brain rot Zoomer stuff,
Mm.
or
Yeah.
or you have the guys, Gen X guys, in this guy's case, who is like, wait a minute, I thought we hated the power. I thought we hated the powers that be here,
Right, right, right.
And so I've heard many anecdotes about people who were kind of default Democrat liberals. And in Nashville, where I am, it's a blue dot. It's a moderately blue dot in a vast, in I think the reddest state,
Close
one
to
of
it
the
if it's
reddest
not.
states.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty
And
darn red.
so you have that kind of embattled effect where some people are more like Austin, Texas kind of effect where you've got, strong blue dot. You have pockets of strong blue in Nashville that voted Democrat, and Nashville, Davidson County itself went Democrat. But
Mm.
among the creative class, the liberal creative class, of which I'm still somewhat plugged into, I heard a few anecdotes about guys who secretly voted for Trump, or they held their nose and voted for Kamala, but
Mm.
they were not stoked, and they basically wanted to save face at the record release, and like be
Yeah,
able to say in good conscience that they voted for Kamala and all that. But I think ironically though, paradoxically from a Catholic perspective, Trump gained ground with those people because he took the gas off. He took the gas off of the abortion issue,
mm.
and he kicked it back to the states and
Mm.
said as much. You know, had he had some rhetoric about abortion that wasn't as hardline as people like you and I would want, but
Sure.
I think politically it softened the blow
Yeah.
it gave cover to a lot of people to be able to say, well, he's just kicking it back to the States. And he said, up to 12 weeks or whatever, that kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, this is
go
really
on.
interesting, the abortion issue,
Sure.
because it is sort of uncomfortable for people like us, right? I mean, I'll come out and say that if I had my way, there would be a complete ban on abortion. But I know, enough about American law to know that we would probably need a constitutional amendment for that.
Right.
Right.
And so, I mean, was it a victory to overturn Roe? I would say yes. For us, from our point of
Mm.
view, it absolutely was a victory to overturn Roe. But all that means is it goes back to the way it was in 1973,
Right.
which was a state's issue. Now, we can't have it both ways. This is the thing. If we want to be logically consistent, we can't have it both ways. Either it's a federal issue or it's not,
Right.
right? And if we just argued for the past 50 years that it wasn't, that's what we
Sure.
did. And we
Right.
won eventually. We won that argument.
Yeah, I think a lot of people though, Rich, didn't understand that distinction. I mean, I think they just kind of like overturning Roe is the pro-life thing to do, and they kind of understood that. I don't
Uh-huh.
know that they properly understood that that meant kicking it back down to the states in that way. That the way Roe was overturned was not an argument about the metaphysical status of the fetus, right?
Hmm.
But was rather an argument about, at least in the Supreme Court, right, about the basically jurisdiction, right? That
Right.
is, this is not a federal issue, right? And so I think to some degree we're kind of unprepared for that victory, but
No,
also
you're right.
unprepared for the nature of that victory, right?
Yeah.
Which is that we did overturn it, but we kind of locked it in as a state issue. Now, personally, I'm okay with that. I think that's
Uh-huh.
fine. I kind of think from a tactical, strategic point of view, that makes sense. I think also from a constitutional point of view, it makes sense as well. Put it this way, I mean, again, um, if you want to be logically consistent, like you said, this still is like a federal republic, right? Which means we
Uh-huh.
do have a real distinction between the local and the federal or the central,
Yeah.
and that's going to sometimes hash out in our favor and sometimes maybe not so much, right? Or there
Hmm.
might be things we want to do that are harder to do, right? Because of
Yeah.
that distinction.
Right. Now that doesn't mean you don't want to do them. It just means that they're
Sure.
harder,
That's
right?
right.
It means that you have to do them differently. Okay.
Mhm.
So this is the thing, right? Overturning Roe doesn't all of a sudden make abortion illegal throughout the country.
Right.
And the question is, when you're trying to win long term,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I don't know what Trump's personal views are. He's said in the
Sure.
past that he was, strongly pro-life, that he had become strongly pro-life in the course of his life. I'll take
Mhm.
him at his word for that. He campaigned this time as someone who is sort of moderate on it,
Mhm.
right? Um, but if you're planning to win the war,
Mhm.
right, then you've got to sort of fight on your fronts um, in a way that's strategically viable.
Sure.
And he was smart enough to know that if he makes abortion the front issue on this,
Hmm.
he's likely to lose the election, and then the game is lost,
Yeah.
right? It's over. You could be sure that we would
Right.
lose tremendous ground after that.
Sure.
So I would say, from a practical point of view, he did exactly what he should have done to advance the pro-life cause.
Yeah.
It sounds,
How much do you think the trans issue played in this, especially regarding um trans, I don't know what you call it, men and or trans women, I guess, and female sports, and then like transing children.
I think it was big
Yeah.
for a couple of reasons. One, I think there are plenty of people who just had no appetite for, the videos of 17-year-old girls getting permanent injuries, right?
Demolished.
From, yeah, I mean, like, we used to think that that was the kind of thing that you would want to prevent,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I
Right.
mean, there was a reason why women were sort of blocked out of competitive sports in high school and college in the past, right? It was because they couldn't compete against these men. So de facto, they had no place on the teams.
Well, we create, yeah, that's why we created women's sports, right?
That's why we created women's sports, and now
And
you
even
have
all the
biological men.
civil rights legislation that was used to kind of say, oh, you have to give equal right support, right, to female athletics as to male athletics, say at colleges. That all presuppose, right, the distinction you're drawing, right, that men and women are different, and that in order
Right.
for women to have an equal opportunity to experience athletic development and engage in sports, then they need, this sort of thing, right? They need a separate but equal sort of setup, right,
Yeah.
for them to experience athletic excellence and victory.
And even though for the most part we would have to admit that in terms of the theatrics of sports, women's athletics never really, for the most part, they didn't garner a great deal of attention. They weren't, whatever. Learned we were okay with that. For
Sure.
generations, we were fine with that, with that solution to the problem of just having women's athletics and making
Mhm.
sure that it had its funding. And
Yeah.
but when you admitted men, biological men, into the field and women started to get injured by them,
Right.
um, and like trophies that should have gone to these young women who, for women, competed at the top of the game,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But they can't compete against even a mediocre biological male. They can't.
Mhm. Mhm.
No.
And so it was just I think a huge portion, I'd like to know the statistics on this. I don't, but I would like to actually see some studies on this. I, I just get the sense that a massive portion of the population looked at this and just says, no.
Yeah, this is silly. Yeah, the polling is out there. The majority of Americans were against having trans women in women's athletics. I think another one, and I know Whit, you were involved in this on the ground level, is transing children, right?
Yeah.
Like that. I mean,
Right.
I think that's one that we're like, even the UK, as screwed up as it is, right?
Yeah.
They've suspended
Hormone therapy.
yeah, hormone therapy because they're like, I don't know about this. Like, it's kind of irreversible. It has huge ramifications for the future of the child. We don't really know like how like what's going on here. This just seems like something like we should, not be something that a child should experience.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I rail often against the Victorian understanding of childhood.
uh,
Um, that that because it's morphed into the house as a hotel and and permanent fun time for children, as
mm,
opposed to working in the mines. But um,
mm.
but this sentiment really saved the day here
Mm,
because children, while they're the ultimate evidence, they're the best evidence for original sin. Just watching them interact with each other and with me.
Yeah, that's what
Um,
Augustine thought.
yeah, like that's they're not, it's not a fluffy cloud. They've got this innocence about them. They really do. The transing the kids thing, I think, was a real hinge point for a lot of people.
mhm.
And because I think of the electorate, if you're voting in America, you care to a degree about
Right.
how the country's going, and enough people were watching because everyone's got their phones. Okay, like
Yeah.
we all have these like the Veblen goods of the Gilded Age are no longer in play. We Everyone has their phone, from Kanye West to Trump to me. Everyone's
Mhm.
on these Chinese scrying mirrors that we all have, the Library of Alexandria in our pocket, and we're all watching the same kind of stuff. We're on
Yeah.
Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on whatever, and in the privacy of one's own bed, you can be scrolling through and seeing horrors beyond human comprehension, as Nikolai
Sure.
Tesla said. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, the trans the kids thing, I think, was a bridge too far. I think in America, we're still uh, at baseline a kind of libertarian kind of country, and so most adults, when pressed, are like, if you want to do whatever you want to do as an adult, that's one thing, but it's the kids. Now, I'm not libertarian minded, and I'm like,
Mm.
you should not be allowed
Right.
to trans yourself, okay? To cut off your genitals like Origin. All right. So, uh, honestly, and so I think that was a huge issue. I mean, I
Mhm.
was involved with helping get the Vanderbilt Pediatric Trans Clinic shut down,
Right on.
and I almost got killed for it. A demoniac tried to run me over and failed. It was great, but my guardian angel stepped in pretty heavily there. But in any case, we got it shut down here in Tennessee. And the legislature here in Tennessee gratefully moved very quickly on that issue.
Yep.
But I think that as far as the federal electorate goes, yeah, here's what I think really happened with Trump. I think that the right wing has recaptured the comedy. We're the
Mm.
funny ones now,
Uh,
Uh,
and Trump is funny, and his antics are funny, and you can't really deny that. It's like a permanent SNL skit that's
uh,
funny. And so that George Bernard Shaw, the great um, Fabian, he said you can tell people the truth, but be sure to make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you.
I
Okay, so
think that's fair.
yeah, so I think I agree with you that transing the kids was a major, major issue.
Mm.
Um, I Yeah, I think that was a major issue. A lot of people got on board with that. And what's interesting is that when RFK Jr. came over to support Trump, one of his issues, right, was the problem with medicalization of everything.
Mhm.
And he's my understanding is that he's pretty staunchly opposed to this thing. So that's an example of this. There's a restructuring of the Republican Party, right? It's really significant. And the fact of the matter is that we can't really say exactly that it's conservative
Mhm.
at this point, right? Is Republican conservative? There are a lot of conservatives in the Republican Party. If you want to be a conservative, you're probably in the Republican Party.
Sure.
But these days, this coalition is not conservative as such. It's a lot of
Yeah.
things, but
What it is not um, Reaganite free market libertarianism, right?
no.
It's not that anymore. I mean,
right.
there is a libertarian sort of stripe or faction maybe within it, or one that leans that way. But I don't think that's the block, and it's certainly not MAGA, right?
Yeah. It's anti-establishment.
That's
is
right.
what
Yeah.
it is what it is. And if you want to say that in essence that's what MAGA is all about, maybe that's what it's become. That's what MAGA has
Sure.
sort of become. It's just anti-establishment
Mhm. Yeah.
and populist, right?
Right.
But and you've got liberals and conservatives on that train.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's a big thing. And I think the transing the kids issue was a big part of that because it's
Yeah.
about this medicalization thing,
Mm.
right? Um, yeah, so all right, we've been talking about politics for a while. What else happened in 24?
What do you got?
Oh man. Okay. 2024 recap. I would say from a Catholic perspective, we are in the middle. 2024 has really shown what I've known for a little bit, which is that the Catholic Church is having a great awakening,
Mm,
and that the young people are converting. And basically, like Twitter, if you're not Catholic on Twitter, there's like 15 big evangelical accounts or whatever. But most of the heavy hitters on Twitter in the Christianity space are Catholic,
yeah.
and the overwhelming numbers of people who are posting are Catholic. And like, I think I converted in 2014, so
Hmm.
at the time it was not cool.
Yeah. Right.
Oh,
Right.
Like, it was not.
congratulations, 10-year anniversary.
Yes, it was not cool to be Catholic,
Uh-huh.
and yet, due to y'all two and some others, I was like, oh wait, it actually is very cool, and I don't want to go to hell, and I want to live a good life here
Right.
on earth and serve the one true God. Um, but I've been delighted because I was kind of like settling into being like just a loner in a way, like not not a loner, but and that's the beauty of the internet now is that um you're not alone.
Hmm.
Whether you're Catholic or a white dad, you're not alone.
Hmm.
And this is showing that, and it's giving encouragement to people. And so that's the biggest takeaway, is that while the Vatican is booming, they're big boomers and they're booming around. Um, the
Sure.
the Gen Z, millennial, and Gen Alpha, like older Gen Alpha, I suppose,
Hmm.
uh, are seriously engaging. There's two paths for these men and women. Either they become libs of TikTok, like tier cringe,
Hmm.
or they realize that the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and that a virtual Benedict option is the only other way to go. Like, because the rest of it's a dead end.
Hmm.
I mean, some people escape into like sports betting and the barstool nationalism and all that, but
Sure.
that's a young man's game, and that won't last. Hopefully. So that's my biggest takeaway for 2024 as far as Catholicism and culture goes, is that the church is still hemorrhaging people, and 2020 was a huge winnowing event where people were pruned out of the church who were just kind of going for whatever, and then once they got a hall pass, they never came back to class.
Uh-huh.
um and that's fine, but like, the Zoomers are on fire. And I was actually talking to a recent convert, a guy who I sponsored into the church recently, um after mass this morning, and he's about my age, and we were talking about young guys who worked at his business, and he's like, how do I like evangelize these left-leaning guys? And I'm like, dude, you pay them, you don't deprive them of their wages, you're diligent, and then just remember, we're winning. It is now cringe to be a John Stewart, Sam Harris tier atheist. It's
Right.
cringe.
Yeah.
No one thinks that's cool anymore.
Hmm.
No one thinks Richard Dawkins himself doesn't even believe in Richard Dawkins. I
Yeah,
mean,
they
he was,
even a lot of those guys have even come out and said, "Oh, well, I'm culturally a Christian," and I know
yeah,
some people push back on that, like, "Well, we don't like cultural Christianity." Like, no, you're not. You're missing the point. What they're
right.
recognizing is that Christianity is healthy for Western civilization, even if they happen to not believe it, which is in fact true,
That's
right?
a
Yeah, and
that's
they're
actually
only saying
that's
that
a
because ISIS is back,
what's
and
interesting
that's
is that
fine.
that view, that cultural Christianity view, right, among the Dawkins types, that's that's really just a return to Edwardianism, right? I mean, that was
Right.
kind of the Edwardian enlightened attitude.
Mhm.
And it's coming back. So you see they've pushed things as far as they could, and they're starting to realize it doesn't work very well. Well,
That's
that
right.
means
That's
that
right.
the things are moving back in the other direction.
Sure. But,
Yeah,
even
Richard Dawkins. Go ahead, go ahead.
even Leo the 13th and Pius the 11th, I mean, they point out, of course, right, that the Catholic social teaching is rooted in these permanent eternal truths, and it's about
Yeah.
justice and the good and all these substantive things. But they also point out, right, and Paul VI and Humana Vitae points out, right, that there are many blessings to the temporal realm when
Mhm.
Christian principles are followed, right? It's not only that it's true and good and just, but it is also useful and beneficial, right? That's not a dichotomy, right? We can sort of say both things are true, recognizing that the substantive truth of the matter is the most important, but it's also important that following the true way is actually good for society and beneficial to all, even those who are not Christian.
Correct. Like if you've got a bunch of Holy Ghost filled people who are bearing fruit, you're
Hmm.
going to live in an orchard, which is awesome.
Yes,
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And
exactly.
so
Yeah.
you're going to get an orchard if you're it, and once the orchard starts getting pillaged,
Yeah, right.
like Richard Dawkins can, I know I don't they don't have Thanksgiving in the UK, but I bet he's been to enough conferences now where they're
Uh-huh.
like, please put your preferred pronoun on your thing,
Right.
preeminent atheist, and
Uh,
he's like, oh dear, uh, this is like a Monty Python. What are we living in a Monty Python skit? This is
right. Yeah.
like, he's not ready for the smoke. Like, it's all well and good when you're with Trey Parker and South Park and you're skewering the Book of Mormon and George W. Bush and like Catholic
Uh,
sex scandals. And like, it's like when I became an atheist in eighth grade, I was like, yes, ha, I can do whatever I want. And then the
right.
devil was like, yes, you can.
Uh,
And you can do whatever you want, can't you? And then my life sucked. It sucked for a long
mm,
time
mm,
until I came to the faith. And I think that that's what's happening. It's whiplash. The West is experiencing some whiplash because we're not dealing like I even man when I'm talking like on this podcast or with friends or whatever. Sometimes I'll get kind of abstracted. Like
mhm.
the faith is, we're going to talk about the faith. We're going to talk about the culture and the civilization and all that. Like this is real
Right. Right.
and like it's foundational. And
Mhm,
if that gets divorced or even siloed in an Edwardian fashion, that's not going
mhm,
to cut it.
mhm.
And there's going to be real ramifications for people from Richard Dawkins to your average Joe in America. And
Right.
they're going to go, wait a minute. And it's kind of like that Chesterton quote where he talks about Christmas. He says something to the effect of, we go on celebrating Christmas and giving benedictions and keeping the feast. And then suddenly one day we wake up and realize why,
Mhm,
you
Mhm.
know? And I think that that's what's happening now. Like Christmas this year, um, I've been saying Merry Christmas to people. Like today, I said Merry Christmas to a guy
mhm.
and to a Catholic. And I think 10 years ago, if you had said Merry Christmas to a guy, even like a trad kind of Catholic guy, they'd be like, oh, yeah, 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 Merry Christmas. Every single person, Merry Christmas. And
Yeah.
everyone's like,
Right.
yeah, Merry Christmas, man.
Right.
Like, it's
It's
not like we're
interesting you say that.
LARPing, we're not LARPing the 12 days of Christmas. Like, we're like, all right, it's Christmas time,
Uh-huh.
Sure.
eh, you know? So
It's
that's my
interesting you should say
takeaway.
it. I noticed that there are a lot more lights in my neighborhood than there were
Mhm.
last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're
Mhm.
keeping them up. That's
Uh-huh.
another thing. Like usually people like today are like throwing the trees out like that
Mhm.
or whatever, or maybe they took them down right after Christmas. Nah, like people are putting them up earlier, like right after Halloween and all that, which is
Mhm.
odious to me. But now they're like keeping them up, and it's
Mhm.
like, be careful. You might actually. We've been singing on the 12th day of Christmas
Right.
for forever,
Sure.
and now we're like, wait a minute, we want that.
Mhm.
We want
Uh-huh.
the
Mhm.
12 days. So
Right.
that's my takeaway for 2024 is that there's a great awakening. And the only way we're going to have the recapture the country at all, because demographics is destiny to an extent, but also conversions. And if
Mhm.
we remain Catholic and we just insert ourselves into the public square at the grocery checkout line, saying Merry Christmas today. If I go to the store, I'm going to say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and
Mhm.
they're gonna try. They're gonna be like, "What? Oh yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year." It just takes 1,000
Yeah.
of those, 1,000,000 of those for people to go, "Oh yeah, huh? Maybe there is something to this. Maybe
Mhm.
I need to revisit that." And I think we're in that season, civilizationally, which is hopeful to me.
Sure. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
your comment about the Gen Z um, movement is kind of important, you know. Um, like I think you're right that there's bifurcation, and I think that's been going on for a long time. In fact, I remember observing it with your generation. Um, I remember that, you know, this realization I had at Aquinas when I was first there. So this was like 2004, 2005, 6. Um, I kind of saw the middle dropping out. You know, like Generation X, we were gray. Generation X was a gray generation, right?
Mhm.
Neither, we weren't really zealous for anything, good or bad.
Right.
And everybody was sort of like, well, you know, um, the
Yeah.
the the like the Closing of the American Mind, Alan Bloom's book,
Yeah.
Mhm.
describes my generation. That was, you know, the Gen Z of the time, um, as nice but not good, right?
Mhm.
We were neither
Yeah.
good nor bad, really. We were just sort of like whatever, gray. And that was sort of culturally a comfortable place to be, but not, well, it wasn't good, right?
Mhm.
What happened between then and now is the middle dropping out. That gray seems to me to be dropping away in favor of black or white.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so, you know, like when I said earlier with the election, people are choosing sides, right? There's evil on one side. And the other
Mhm.
side, well, maybe it's not good yet, but it's not evil, right? So
Right.
that's where I see Gen Z. I see them kind of making that fundamental option.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Now,
Gen Z.
a lot of them are diving off the deep end, but as you said, a
Yeah.
lot of them are becoming attracted to Christianity.
Dude, these Gen Z kids will scare you.
Mhm.
Like I'm in chats with these guys.
Uh,
Kamala said we're unburdened by what has been. Um, they are. They
Uh,
don't care about the Holocaust. They don't care about 9/11. That's boomer to them. They're like, what are you talking about? We don't care. What is real?
mhm.
What is true? What is real? And why does it suck? Why does everything suck? And why can't my millennial older cousin buy a house? And why am I saddled with all this debt? I mean, look, I saw this interview the other day of it was at the Alabama UT University of Tennessee football game, and this guy
Uh,
was going around with a microphone and he was talking to these students, and he was like, "Where are you from?" And they're like, "Connecticut." He's like, "Why'd you choose Tennessee?" And they're like, "SEC. It's like fun and normal
mhm.
and you're seeing this kind of I mean, to put it bluntly, you're seeing this kind of Yankee Unitarian spirit like go away, like it's morphed and been subsumed into the left.
Mhm.
And the young people aren't like, okay, I want to go to the University of Connecticut and like da, da, da. They want to go to where the people are acting normal
Right.
and like fun and having
Uh,
a good time and like there's beautiful people and beautiful
right.
women and that's really what was happening. I think in the 70s you had this Carl Sagan zeitgeist of everyone wearing uh a silver lame jumpsuit and using Esperanto
Uh,
and like we're gonna usher in the new David Bowie androgyny and
kinda
like and
Star
we're gonna
Trek: The
be
Next Generation, right?
yeah and that's not happening. What's happening
Mhm.
is we're still creatures of habit and the natural law really still obtains and
Right.
people in their heart of hearts know that
Right.
men can't be women, women can't be men, you
Right.
shouldn't cut off children's genitals, it's we like inflation is bad, we
Mhm.
and the American identity, like the civic nationalism and that's how to that's MAGA now. Civic nationalism is MAGA, where
Sure.
it's like we are Americans and we don't need people who are gonna not want to be like us
Sure.
anymore.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and that's overwhelming. And then you have more ethno nationalism and even religious nationalism, which I would fall into that more of that camp, that religious nationalism, where I'm like, yeah, we need a like confessional state. Okay. All
Yep.
right. We need a confessional state, but that ain't happening until my children's grandchildren are the only people having kids.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, wait, there's no one else to vote but the Amish, Mormons, and Catholics. You
That's
know,
right. Yeah.
like there's no one to vote.
Right.
Everyone's either aborted their bloodlines out of existence or
Uh,
they've succumbed to this malaise where they're just not having
mm.
children. So
Right. I
that's
mean,
the
it's
biggest shoe to
interesting,
drop.
even in late night comedy, when the a lot of women came out after the election and said, "Okay, men, not a lot, but a particular group of, say, liberal leaning women came out and said, well, we're not going to have sex anymore with men, and we're not going to get married anymore and have no kids." And even like the comedian, like some of the comedians kind of like, and that's your strategy, like to not reproduce, right? Like, like that's a self-destroying strategy, right? I mean, kind of going
Yeah, and also
about
they didn't know we were going to be like, your terms are acceptable.
that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Like, yeah, it's like that's even a meme, right? Like you say, the left can't meme. They, the problem, right, is, I mean, you put this in, kind of a little bit older, slightly now older paradigm, but it's literally a culture of death, right?
Uh-huh.
Where,
Correct.
like what we want is to not have children, to abort children, and to trans children. And basically that's a road towards the suicide of your country, right?
Correct.
I mean,
It's a
literally,
war against it's a war against nature, it's a war against natural law, it's a war against
yeah,
God.
yeah. So I think that, in some senses, JP2, right, who I have some
Spot on.
criticisms of, nevertheless, was on target, right, with that phrase, right, that,
Spot on.
yeah,
He
that
was
this is,
interesting thing,
it's a trend towards self-destruction
right.
in the
He was
name of
only reminding the
autonomy, and
world,
it's
I want to
still even
point out.
stupid.
He was only reminding the world of something that had been known in Judaism and Christianity for like millennia,
Right, right,
right?
yeah.
I mean, the Old Testament is called the two ways,
That's
right?
right. I was, yeah, about to say that. Yeah. That's
So
the like.
we had stopped using that kind of language, but John
Mm,
Paul II kind of brought it back and gave it an aggiornamento, right?
sure.
But thank you, JP2, for that because
Yeah.
that was actually really useful.
So I want to add my own 2 cents here a little bit, but then I think I'll tie into your comments, gentlemen. Um, I'll give an interpretation, right,
Uh,
of these various trends. My interpretation is that after decades, right, of kind of this culture of death, this sort of Westerners constantly, bashing themselves, criticizing themselves, right, with the advent of critical race theory, all these things, right? I think a lot of people have just said enough, right? I think even more strongly amongst the younger generations, as Witt's pointing out. And then what's really going on is kind of under the force of being attacked constantly, right?
mhm.
Christians and Western civilization more generally are rediscovering what I would call the virtue of piety, right? What not I call, St. Thomas calls the virtue of piety,
Right.
right? And closely associated the virtue of religion, right? That is that we need this as what you kind of talked about in terms of Esperanto, this sort of rootless, unidentified, cosmopolitan non-identity that's childless and has no grounding is not actually a good way to live. What we need is to be connected to our roots. We need to be connected to our sources, right? And that's what the
Right.
virtue of religion and piety are about, right? Honoring God, honoring your country, and honoring your family, right? Literally, the word that's translated as country in most of the translations of Thomas's work, right, is patria,
Mhm.
right, which is the place of your father, right?
Right.
That's a strong connection. That's a rootedness, right? And that frankly, we're tired of our fathers and our fathers' fathers being constantly demonized, right? To have for your culture, for your society, for your country to maintain itself, right?
Mhm,
You have to, in some, at least some degree, love it, right?
mhm.
That doesn't mean you have to sort of hide from its failures or things of that nature, but you say, look, there's a bigger story here, and I grant the defects in American history, but I'm not going to be sort of like uh, forever daunted in my love of the country because of that, right? I'm going to say,
No,
hey, there's a time where these bad things have happened, but I still love my father. I love my father's fathers. I love, and I want to continue that. Like I want there to be more Smiths going on,
right.
right? And I want to hand on the good things that I received to them. So there has to be some kind of love, piety, right,
Mhm.
of one's sources, I think, to have an energetic and living culture. Rich, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So it's interesting, we kind of want these days we want our history to make sure that it tells the darkest possible story, you know. That's been the trend for a long time.
Mm,
The truth is, if you think about your own family history that way,
right,
you would consider it really toxic and psychotic, right? For a
sure,
person to recount his family story in the darkest possible terms.
right,
Usually what happens is we tell the best story we can about our
sure,
family, right? And even though, there are things about growing up that were less than ideal, your parents didn't always make all the right decisions.
right,
When you tell your family story, you tend to focus on the positive things.
right,
And that's not false, right? In
right,
some ways, that's truer than the most honest possible story you could tell,
yeah,
in which your family history, is like dotted with various nefarious actors, possibly, right?
sure,
Um, the, I mean, you go back far enough in anybody's family line, there are going to be some nefarious actors. But why do we do that with our, what is it about our story for our country or for our civilization that makes us all of a sudden want to paint it in the darkest possible light?
hmm,
You're talking about,
Because we've been convinced to do that. I
right.
mean, you say that we tend to do that. That's not true among my generation. Most people are trying to tell the darkest possible story about their family. They
mm,
don't lead with admiration
yeah,
normally. And if they
Yeah, see, I would
do,
say Gen X still did, I
we
would say.
don't. And Gen Z definitely doesn't. It's this like, well, my father, he had undiagnosed narcissism. And you're like,
Uh-huh.
oh my gosh, it's cringe. But because of that, it starts there. And because of that, that's why the nation now, because it's like, well, America, we
mm,
enslaved people and, we did all these bad things and
right,
we have the monopoly on cosmic injustice. And it's like,
right,
no, you don't. And you're not that special. It's
right,
called
right,
sin.
right,
Okay.
right.
And everyone sins. And I guess we've loosened up out of the Victorian kind of impulse to be like, no, my father was a hardworking man. He drank a little too much. Parentheses, he
Mm,
was a crippling alcoholic.
mm,
Okay. Like, yeah, it's fine to be like, yeah, my dad was not an alcoholic, but like, my grandpa was an alcoholic. He wasn't an alcoholic. But for example, it's okay,
mm,
yeah, we got stuff going on, and I think it's fine to say it, but instead of it's now it's this pendulum has swung to where we're honing in on the faults of our fathers
mm,
as opposed, and that was a big psychic shift for me
mm,
when I was coming into the church because like I had a lot of resentment against my dad and a lot of teenage angst and all this stuff, and my dad's not perfect, my mom's not perfect, but one of the milestones of maturing is
right.
going, yeah, but they're sinful adults,
Mm, sure.
and they weren't like gravely, they weren't like crazy people, they
Right.
weren't
Sure.
they weren't
Sure.
like evil people. It's
Uh-huh.
just going, oh, yeah, yeah. So now when I talk to people about my family, I'm like, yeah, mom and dad, they're still together. Good dude, great lady. So, I mean, I'm tired of the flagellation. I'm
Right.
Yeah.
tired
That's
of,
flagellation.
so But it's
So,
easy. It's easy to be negative. That's the whole thing. It's easy to be negative. It's way
Mm,
easier to be like, well, these people suck. And, and it's
yeah,
just sin.
we're
It's
talking
just
about
sin.
we're talking about the fourth commandment, actually, right? Honor your
mm,
father and your mother, and your
right,
days will be long in the land that I have given you to take possession of it. The
So true.
Right? So when you take that away, you don't honor your father and your mother. You don't honor your ancestors. You don't honor your country, right? All this piety goes away. You eventually commit civilizational suicide, and that's kind of what
right,
we're talking about.
right, right. Yeah, what my hope is that we've pushed the pendulum such that kind of the Overton window is shifting in this other direction back towards piety, right? Where
Hmm.
people don't want, maybe they're not be able to label it, right? But that there's an instinct there for, you know what, American culture, it's mixed, but it's mine and it's good. And there's a lot
Hmm.
that I love about it. I remember one time when I was in England and there was some race riots that broke out in America. Um, I remember some guys at the pub I was at kind of laughing about it. And at the time I wasn't super like patriotic necessarily, but I was sort of like, hey, that's my country.
Yeah.
Don't laugh at it. It sucks that that's happening. I want my country to do well, right?
Right.
And I think to sort of at a basic level, my thought is that a lot of the things that we've talked about here in terms of both politics and culture and younger generations kind of tapping into um, sort of a pushback, right, on the sort of the extremes of subversion and so forth, that there is a rediscovery of our need for sources, right? That we,
Hmm.
namely the God, family, and country. There's a reason those have gone together traditionally, right?
Yes.
That you do find like a convergence of those things. People who love their country also tend to be religious and love their family. Not always,
Yeah.
and same thing. People who love God tend to love their country and their family, and I think those things go together. And I think right, we're seeing some reassertion of that. One thing we could.
I go
Oh,
ahead.
no,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say that that's true, but what all that sentiment, the mea culpa,
Mm,
that that is that recentering of the goodness of the faith,
hmm.
that's part of the resurgence and the Great Awakening.
All right, gents. Well, let's. We've got kind of long here, but I do want to go ahead and talk just a little bit about the future. So let's keep it concise here if we can. What do you see in the upcoming year here from a Catholic perspective, Rich?
Yeah, so I don't know what to predict from a Catholic perspective, but I do think, I mean, I find promising the idea that we have young people, in spite of everything, coming into the church.
Hmm.
And I kind of agree, that the boomer generation, which has brought us, if I'm going to be honest, the attrition in the church, is there's nothing you can do to prevent them from dying. Um, it's only a matter of time before they just go away. And the people who have been coming into the church, um, particularly people coming into leadership positions, I mean, through the seminary, right? The people who
Hmm.
are on the train eventually to fill the rows of the clergy have been generally much more traditionally minded about things.
Hmm.
Um, Much more sort of like straight up orthodox. Um, and so I guess I just look to the future with a certain degree of optimism for the church. Um, I will, honestly, I'll be surprised if we escape the current time without some sort of fairly significant schism. But nonetheless, I think that the
Hmm.
future of the church is going to be pretty strong.
All right, good. That's good. I think you're probably right. I mean, I think one of the issues there that'll have to play out. And I listened to a broad spectrum of things, both Catholic and Protestant. Um, some of this is going on in the Protestant uh, churches as well. Is this sort of phenomena of the younger generation is just not. So like when Generation Z goes right, they go real right. And so the idea here being that, within the churches even, or ecclesial communities, however you put it, how is the leadership that's still there going to deal with um, a new generation of people who come in who are really fervent and aren't kind of willing to um, make the same compromises,
Hmm.
right, as previous generations, right? Um, are they going to just sort of try to um, smother them, or are they going to, sort of prudently guide them, right, and accept them too, right, but also, give them, prudent guidance where it's needed. I think that's kind of a real question in terms of the leadership of the Catholic Church and really all the other sort of faith communities as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, my 2025 forecast, is this what we're doing? Forecast?
Forecast, big question, big problem, however you want to put it.
I think, as far as the church goes, I'm not sure Francis makes it through the year.
Hmm.
He's in a wheelchair with one lung. And I don't know. I honestly kind of don't care who is the Pope next, because what I'm like, I believe that the Pope will not err on faith and core for faith and morals.
Hmm.
Right. I'm Catholic. So bring it on. If the next guy wants to do more, you know, bullshit, we're already subjected to a lot.
Hmm.
And the conversion rate now is incredible. I think it's only going to get bigger. I think 2025. I mean, I was on Twitter, and this is all anecdotal. And I know the broader trends, the statisticians are like, dude, you're hemorrhaging people. You're still hemorrhaging people. And I know my algorithm is honed in. Dude, all these people are announcing they're becoming Catholic,
Hmm.
or just saying, I hereby declare that I'm coming into the Catholic Church.
Hmm.
And so I think that 2025 is extremely hopeful,
Yeah.
as we gain souls, and
Yeah.
as the sensus fidelium, the sense of the faithful, is that we're done with the UN powwow.
Hmm.
We're
Hmm.
done with that. And even if this Pope dies and the Cardinals don't swing right, and we get some, Justin Welby guy or something. Um, Even if that happens, unless the man outright is outright heretical and not like, I mean, I love Vigano. I met Archbishop Schneider this year. Great man, a saint. I think he's a saint. Um, but like, unless the next pope comes out and is like, gay marriage is in the catechism now, like
Right.
something
Right.
crazy.
Sure.
I think most people are gonna be like, all right, that's the Pope, and like that's gonna be annoying to have to talk about in mixed company. But let me explain how the sacraments make you free.
Hmm.
I mean, that's the faith there at the end of
Sure.
the day. And so I think that we're gonna have a huge harvest this year of Catholics. And yeah, I mean, the biggest question though is what what is going to happen with Rome? How are they going to respond? I think they're going to keep responding in the same way. They're going to suppress the Latin Mass and all that. Though I will say, in the vein of piety, as a millennial myself, we're not ones to really respect our elders, you
Hmm.
know. And I do want to caution trads, um, who I consider myself in that camp. It's all well and good. You got to chill out though a little bit sometimes and be like, all right, that's the literal bishop.
Hmm.
Like if we believe what we believe, he could cast me out into the darkness.
Hmm.
I need to like you're it's kind of the new convert podcaster the next day pipeline kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
whoa, 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 you're a neophyte.
Right.
Like you need to settle in and learn
Right.
how to live like a Christian.
Yeah, my
before
friend,
you get,
my
yeah.
friends that are Calvinist call it when you first like become a Calvinist, they call it cage stage Calvinism, right? Where you're just like, like let's get in the WrestleMania, well, cage and let's duke it out of over everything. It's sort of like, actually, you probably just need to calm down a little bit. It's great that you found this truth, but that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You can find the same thing in in the Roman Catholic Church, right? You come in and you're like ready to battle everybody over I don't know whether they wear the right papal slippers or something, right? And you're
Right.
like, come on, like, calm down a little bit.
Like, yeah. I mean, I too am a Gucci originalist. Okay. Like,
My own thoughts about 2025, I have a lot, but I'll just emphasize um, one. But I think this touches on the Catholic Church in a global setting. So change foot here a little bit. So we've been primarily domestic. Is I still think we've got a situation globally where we're dealing with the um, difficulties surrounding, I guess, what you might call Islamic civilization and Arab civilization, right?
mhm.
And how that does or does not mesh, with Western civilization, right? Obviously, we've just had a terrorist situation here in America go down. There, it is actually being accepted as a terrorist act at this point by most, the news outlets. There's obviously been a lot of violence and difficulties in Europe with sort of, some Arab groups, some Islamic groups. Not all Arabs, by the way, of course, are Muslims. Very important to make that distinction. That's why I say Arab sometimes. And then, of course, then we also have difficulty in the Middle East, right? I mean, I think right now the Arab world um, is, to my mind, kind of rightly incensed with the degree of killing that's happening in Gaza, in southern Lebanon, and in Syria. Um, so it's a difficult situation, like all the way around, right? I think two things can be true at once. One is that this poses a major challenge for dealing with Islam in the West, right? There are plenty of imams who are in America now who say that, they want to make America Muslim and that they want Sharia law established in the United States, right? And the same thing is true in Europe. I think that's a problem, right? I don't want Sharia law, and I don't think I don't think from a Catholic perspective we want Sharia law established within Western civilization.
No.
On the other hand, it can also be true that I think the Arabs are suffering a great deal of abuse in the Middle East, especially from the state of Israel. And, I think Hamas is a legitimate target, but that doesn't mean you get a blank check. And, we're going at something like 40,000 plus dead in Gaza and more than, in addition in southern Lebanon. So it's complicated, I think, how to deal with that issue. And of course, the church is very much involved in this, especially at the global level, right? There
Right.
are, Christians in the Middle East. Everybody forgets that, but there are, Eastern Orthodox Christians all throughout the Middle East. There are Maronite Catholics in Lebanon.
Mhm.
There are Catholics, Arab Catholics in Gaza. Um, and they're having a hard time, right? From multiple directions. Um, and I think at some point, the global consensus right now is that Israel's bordering on being a rogue state. Um, the Prime Minister of Poland has issued that if Netanyahu tries to come to Poland, that he'll arrest him, right? So, I mean, it's a pretty broad consensus at this point, with the exception of America, um, that Israel's gone too far with all this. So I think that like
Right.
how all that works out is a big question for the church kind of going forward, right? What's the church's witness about what's going on in Gaza and southern Lebanon, but also what's the church's witness about how to deal with attempts to establish Sharia law in places which it traditionally has not been established.
Yeah, I think that's a huge question. And I wish that the church would, pardon me driving, but I wish that the church would address it, because here's what's going to happen. Um, the post-war consensus Holocaust uh, stuff that, like I said, with the Zoomers, they don't care. And the left wing certainly does not care at this juncture. And so the church needs to be issuing statements about Jews, about Muslims, and how, the nations should be responding. I mean, I get that the church has been hands off, more hands offish than, of course, like in the 1800s and stuff, but and around the time of communism, communist Russia. But we're dying over here.
Mm,
We need to know what to do and how to regard it. I mean, we kind of already do, but it'd be nice to have some formal guidance here, aside from calling to end of all wars every mass, which is good. But like,
sure.
because it's true. Like, I don't want Sharia law, and we shouldn't have it here. And I also don't want Israel's lobby um, taking everyone to J. Alexander's all the time. Um, like I don't want that.
What you need is for the church. I, I think with the bumper sticker approach is not working very well.
Sure.
Where what we have is the magisterium making comments that are sort of um, the innuendo is, this particular political figure did something bad, but without coming out and like naming names or anything. I think what
Mm,
actually needs to happen is a reiteration of the perennial teaching of the church on various matters concerning just war, international law, those sorts
mm,
of things. We have a rich teaching tradition
sure.
about these issues that we could
Yeah.
just remind the world of. And then we can maybe contextualize the events that we're witnessing and try to make judgments about them from that point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, well, yeah, we definitely need, I think, um, more frequent and more precise guidance, I think, in this matter, because it is serious. And I know, as Americans, we tend to not pay attention to what's going on around the world that much, right? We do sometimes, but, not consistently. Um, but it is a serious matter. Of course, it also concerns, Christians in the Middle East. It concerns the holy sites, right? And access to the holy sites. Um, and a lot of sort of associated matters. And it is sort of a global issue, right? In terms of how we suss out, how we negotiate, right? What you could call, a clash of civilizations, um, and sort of what the lines are there. But I think that's going to be a big question coming forward. And like Whit said, I think it concerns both how we think about what's going on in the Middle East, but also how we think about what's going on here, right?
Hmm.
That we need sort of leadership and direction in both of those areas. Uh, I'd like to see that, and so that we can kind of speak clearly and think clearly about those important things, because it really is. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about having access to the internet, about having access to like things like Twitter, when you go on Twitter, like you can see like the photographs um, unedited, right?
Hmm.
And it's gruesome. I mean, it is it's gruesome to see a lot of what's happened there in Gaza and in southern Lebanon. I mean, I think like there was a place,
And New Orleans,
well, and
and
in
New
New
or
Orleans, absolutely,
and New
yeah.
Orleans.
It's
It's
and what happened in Germany too, right? With the Christmas market, um, terrorist act. I mean, those things are gruesome, and so like they have to be, I think, addressed, and we have to think about a rational, moral way of doing that, and the church needs to kind of guide us in that direction. Well,
My
guys,
succinct, last thing, my succinct summary of all that is it's not Christian.
mm,
It's
yeah,
just not, it's not Christian activities. So,
sure. Yeah,
you know, it'd be nice if that was fleshed out.
yeah.
So,
All right, gents, thanks a lot. We went kind of long. I hope our listeners, viewers enjoyed the conversation, found it interesting, enjoyable, and maybe useful. Um, Rich, you got anything you want to plug before we get off here?
No, not really.
Okay,
Just Happy New Year and Merry Christmas.
absolutely. Whit,
yeah, watch my show. It's called Gold Pilled. It's on
cool.
YouTube, Spotify. Gold pilled, like red pilled, but gold, for the
Gold
faith.
pill. Yeah,
Anyway,
I like it. It's good. Yeah, I've
cool.
got some. I'm always here on CSA, but I also have some material I'm developing over at Logos Letter 2022. So you go check me out there on Substack. Um, and of course, always, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to Take Every Thought Captive. Until